Welcome, Rodolphe, on this stage. So we're going to discuss this transition to the low carbon economy. What needs to change for the European energy sector to achieve this low carbon transition?
Yeah, I think maybe it sounds like a cliche, but at the end of the day, it depends what you want by success. But success, essentially, especially from the investor's perspective, means competitiveness. And so it means cheap and reliable energy. So for things to change, you basically need to simplify processes. Again, it's nothing new, and the Draghi report says a lot about that. And you need to make sure as well that, because it's not the case in energy, you need to make sure that you have a unified energy market. Today, it's a constellation of regional markets, and a lot is lost in this process. So again, these two things, simplification, integration, needs to happen.
What are the main levers, technological, industrial, and even regulatory, of course, that will determine this transition?
Yeah, I think a lot comes from the top, in the sense, for the points I mentioned earlier, you need a will, essentially coming from political, to basically address the issues that we mentioned. So a lot of it is down to regulation, laws, to achieve what I mentioned earlier. Industrial is slightly different in some ways, because by industrial, it can be, in terms of competitiveness, it can good and bad. I mean, because you will weight it against sovereignty. Industrial is really linked to sovereignty. So again, if you want things made in Europe or you want things made in China, it's a very different plan that you need to have. Technological, much less, because at the end of the day, in terms of impact, whether it's competitiveness or climate change, whatever you want to do, most of the technologies today is ready. The one that have the most impact are ready. The one that are really technological play, they will have an impact a long time ago. And to be honest, most people don't look at that today.
You've mentioned sovereignty. In fact, energy sovereignty has become a major issue, but it looks also like the energy autonomy for the large corporation has become one key issue as well, as illustrated by the partnership between Microsoft and Constellation Energy in the US. This is the 3 Mile Island work in progress. And do you think this is something that could spread to a game changer that could spread to Europe?
I think at the end of the day, investors and companies, they want the same thing as the Mr. Smith everywhere, right? They want a cheap and reliable energy, right? And then whether they're willing to go and restart nuclear plant in Europe, I don't know. But for sure, they want access to cheap, and in the case of nuclear, mostly reliable rather than cheap energy. So again, corporation, what they will do will depend a bit on what the governments want to do. If the governments, based on what you discussed earlier, if the European plan for energy is to provide and can address the issues of cheap and reliable energy, then you don't need the companies to try to do deals on the side, which will be harder to do in Europe anyway. But of course, if it doesn't happen, and then it costs too much to do the compute, they may resort to solutions which are similar to what Microsoft had done with Constellation.
And indeed, to focus more on your current work, when it comes to the European midcap sector you are focusing on with BNP Paribas Asset Manage-ment, which segments, which themes are your current priorities?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, as I mentioned, the sector which are the most, where there's the most demand at the end of the day is the one with the most impact. And not very surprisingly, a huge chunk of what we get is relating to energy generation, right? I mean, again, everything comes down to that. It happens that a lot of it, I mean, in the generation sector for renewables, there's a very long tail. So you have a few players playing with the big numbers, but most of the new projects are developed by smaller players, hence the need for mid-cap players to invest in every single one of them, which eventually will become bigger and integrated in bigger ensembles. But at the end of the day, the mid-cap segment is really the one developing the new project, right? So that's why we're investing in that space. As I said, a lot of it is renewables, a lot of it is solar. In some countries, in wind sector, it's a bit harder. Increasingly, the battery, again, nothing new in there, but again, you need the battery, the share of renewables increase, you need batteries. So regulation fluctuates. You have very good regulation, and you have no regulation at all in some countries. As I mentioned, the unification of Europe, this will need to happen, but again, for sure, battery is a huge thing coming up. And another thing in general is electrification of transport. Again, it's always fast and it's different according to the subsegment. But this also, the faster the generation sector becomes cheap and reliable, the easier it is to transition transport and plenty of sector, to be honest, to electrification. So again, that comes second. So again, that's really where we spend most of our time today.
Who will be the key players in getting to this low carbon economy?
I mean, what we see today is there's increasingly, the market is usually quite efficient, sometimes with a delay. So again, today the market is, you have a few players, large players focusing on big companies, but again, which is mostly secondary transaction. The one, when you need to finance new project, which is what we need today, because there's really a substitution of fossil fuels by cleaner source of energy. New project, there are not that many people that allocate money to it, and rather in proportion of what is needed, there's not that many projects. That's why it's hard to match the objectives of most public policies, because there's just not enough fund yet pursuing the investment opportunities where they are needed. Again, mostly in the mid-cap segment. It will change, again, up to the people like us. But in general, today, it's too concentrated on two large companies, not enough on the long tail of new opportunities.
Rodolphe, thank you. Thank you for joining us today. I know you will be able to discuss further with the crowd later today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.